What's up, everybody? It is time to face the music and have the discussion. Is Dana White and the UFC failing us when it comes to UFC 300? And in this video, I'm going to give my take on that. We're going to take a look at the current card thus far of the fights that we know for UFC 300. And then I'm also going to later on in the video tell you what I think will ultimately headline UFC 300. And if you've been following my channel in my UFC 297 post-fight reaction video, I stated what I think the main event is going to be for this card, but we'll get into that in a little bit here. But guys, I tweeted this out not that long ago on X, and if you look at the fights that are already booked thus far for UFC 300, I don't know how in your right mind you could look at this and say that the UFC's failing us here. Like, guys, the fairy tale that's going around in the MMA community right now, which is that UFC 300 needs to be some sort of crazy spectacle where it's like the whole card is all title fights and legendary matchups. It's like, I know that we could get carried away with that, right? I mean, I made a build-a-card video where I had some matchups that maybe were a little unrealistic or wishful thinking, but at the end of the day, this is going to be a normal-esque pay-per-view card with a more decked-out prelim setup. And, I mean, let's just start off with what we know as of right now, right? Which is Bo Nickal versus Cody Brundage. Now, I know that that's not a matchup that's going to jump off the screen, and not everyone's excited to see Cody Brundage fight, but guys, this matchup is all about getting Bo Nickal in front of the world, where this fight's probably going to be on the early prelims of this card, right? Let's be honest. And Bo Nickal's a star in the making for the UFC. The guy doesn't even have 10 fights yet under, as a pro record. Like, so the dude has got a lot of room to grow into himself as in terms of a professional mixed martial artist. Like, we're just now seeing Bo Nickal put the striking together. We're starting to see him get some finishes under the UFC banner. So, like, pump the brakes a little bit. This matchup is a strategic matchup, right? That's what this is to get Bo Nickal a great win, hopefully a finish is what the UFC's aiming for here on UFC 300, which is going to be on the prelim, so everyone's going to be watching that. So that's the whole idea here. They can post it around on social media. They can do all those things to get everyone to see what Bo Nickal's up to. That's the whole point. Then we move on. Sadique Yousef versus Diego Lopez. And by the way, this isn't in bout order. I'm just going off of what might be, right? I mean, Diego Lopez, Sadique Yousef. This fight is absolutely sensational. I mean, when it comes to Sadique Yousef, we know what he's about. I mean, he's number 12 at featherweight right now. This guy is super well-rounded. He can crack, man. He's got good hands, good power. Sadique Yousef's not a guy that gets put away, so it kind of draws that question mark around the matchup, like, is Diego Lopez going to be able to finish this guy? Because if he can get a finish over Sadique Yousef off of what we've seen from Lopez thus far, which is 2 back-to-back quick finishes, I mean, sky's the limit for this guy. The hype is real around Diego Lopez coming off those wins over Pat Sabatini and Gavin Tucker. I mean, this is a big spotlight for Diego Lopez, UFC 300. He's been on a tear. If he can put away Sadique, craziness, man. He gets a ranking, and they're going to start the avalanche of building this guy as we go, but he's already a big name. People are already excited about Diego Lopez because he's a big guy for the division. He's got good power. His striking's pretty good, but it's the submission game that really kind of draws us to Diego Lopez. But as we're moving up, Kayla Harris and Holly Holm. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, no one wants to see that. Guys, they're going to put women's fights on this card. Like, we already, a fight that we're going to talk about in just a few was Zhang Wei Li and Yan Shana. Like, that's a great title fight, but this is another matchup that's intriguing because Holly Holm, yes, she's not in her prime anymore. We know that, but she's still Holly Holm, and this is interesting because Kayla Harrison, you could make the argument, well, she's never faced anyone like Holly Holm, and maybe that's fair, maybe it isn't, but Kayla Harrison is one of the biggest names in women's MMA outside of the UFC. Well, now she's in the UFC, but for the longest time in the PFL, basically dominating everyone, right? I mean, it's not often you find a 2-time Olympic gold medalist walking around with the credentials that she has in terms of the wrestling. She's very physically strong. She has outstanding grappling. She has really good power. Now, the question's going to be, can she make the weight? Because this is going to be at bantamweight. And that's going to kind of be the question mark that looms over this matchup leading into it. But to say that this isn't interesting, this is interesting because it's a striker versus grappler matchup. We haven't seen Kayla Harrison fight the top competition, basically, right? Because she's been outside the UFC. People always view the UFC as the top premier promotion. Now we get to see it against a top 5 ranked opponent in Holly Holm. So before you write off Holly Holm, she's still top 5. So I know that the division isn't exactly that great. She's a little bit older. Still interesting in my opinion. Okay, moving on. Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. Like, who doesn't want to see this fight? I mean, I know that this isn't some crazy fight, but this is a battle of the OGs, right? I mean, Jim Miller's in his 40s. He's kind of defying the odds. He's still putting on impressive performances, getting wins. Like, how can you not root for Jim Miller at this point? And now he's going in there against an OG fan favorite in Bobby Green, who people have been hard on him with that loss against Jalen Turner. That's a tough matchup with Jalen Turner, man. And then, you know, they're kind of forgetting that Bobby Green just went out there and halted the train of Dawson not that long ago with that crazy quick knockout that basically had the world in shambles, because I don't think anyone saw that coming. So Bobby Green can still scrap. This is an OG type of matchup. It makes sense for UFC 300. It's going to be a fun fight. It's going to be a striker's delight. I think we see someone get finished in that matchup. I don't know. Feel free to comment below what you all think. I think that's a great matchup. Okay. Then we have Deiveson Figueiredo and Cody Garbrandt. Now, I know that this matchup's gotten some steam because people are like, RIP Cody. Like, I don't know why he would take this matchup. Well, Cody's on a 2-fight win streak. And I know he hasn't beaten world beaters out there, but gets a knockout win in his most recent fight against Brian Kelleher. Building some steam. The UFC knows Cody Garbrandt's a big name. Guys, Cody Garbrandt's one of the biggest names in the UFC's bantamweight division. They wanted to get him back on track because Cody is one of those guys that if he beats a ranked guy inside the top 10, he's really close to another title shot. And I know people are going to say, how could you say that? Because we know how the UFC model operates, and it's what people want to see, and they kind of would give Cody that pass, considering he's kind of a draw in the division. He's one of the bigger names. He's a former champion. He's got an exciting fighting style. And I'm not ruling Cody out of this matchup. I know a lot of people are, and it is a very hard fight because Figgy is incredibly fast. We saw what he was able to do to Rob Font. The power at bantamweight is not necessarily an issue because Figgy's speed is outstanding. His power still translates. It's a hard fight for Garbrandt, but you can never rule him out because the dude does have crazy speed and power. So I think that this is a great matchup with a lot of stakes on it because if Figgy's able to beat Cody Garbrandt, well, now he's got 2 wins in the bantamweight division. He's maybe 1 more or 2 more fights away from fighting for the bantamweight strap. And then we have Garbrandt, where imagine if Cody goes out there and flatlines Deiveson, dude. That would be absolutely crazy. So, interesting matchup. Okay, Calvin Kattar, Aljamain Sterling. Now, I know that people wanted to see maybe Aljo versus Max Holloway or something along those lines. I believe that this is a matchup to kind of hopefully get rid of Aljamain Sterling in a sense, right? I mean, the UFC does not like Aljamain Sterling. They're not big fans of Merab Dvalishvili. Calvin Kattar's a guy that has tremendous hands, really good power. He's going to be bigger than Aljamain Sterling. He hits really hard. Like, I see this being a disastrous matchup for Sterling because, yes, Aljamain has good submissions, but you got to get a hold of Calvin Kattar first, and Kattar does have good takedown defense. He's very good at range management. He's got a lot of pop in his hands, so I think that this is going to be a hard matchup for Aljamain. Now, with all that being said, Kattar's coming off the injury. He's been away for a while, so it's like, how do those things play into the matchup? That's going to be the key kind of to how this thing plays out, but overall, this is an interesting fight. This is an interesting fight. Aljamain Sterling, former champion, going up to 145. I think it's interesting. Okay, Jiri Prochazka, Aleksandar Rakic. Like, guys, this fight might be a prelim. Like, that's crazy. Aleksandar Rakic, Jiri Prochazka. Prochazka was just headlining UFC 295 with Poatan. I mean, fighting in a world championship fight. And then, not that long ago, fought Glover Teixeira in what was one of the greatest fights we probably have ever seen. So, he's going to be going in there. Jiri's always exciting. Now, kind of the drawback to this fight, which I understand, is Aleksandar Rakic is very boring in a sense, right? The guy's got good power. He's got really good leg kicks, but he doesn't take any risks. He never really puts himself in harm's way, which kind of leads to a boring fight. But Jiri Prochazka is going to be pushing the action. Jiri is very unorthodox in there. He is aggressive and will take chances. So I do believe that that's going to make for an exciting fight. I do believe we see someone get finished in this because Yuri's just not going to sit on the back foot and let Rakic leg kick him all day long. Like we saw how that worked out against Poatan. So I do believe he's going to be a little bit more aggressive. I believe he's going to try to push Rakic back up against the fence and try to let some of those awkward combinations fly. I think this is a great matchup, and it has a lot of stakes on it because whoever wins, especially Rakic, that puts him in position for a possible title shot at 205 in the near future. Okay, Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. Charles Oliveira, guys, is one of the biggest names in the UFC at this moment. I mean, he's got a huge fan base. People love Charles Oliveira. He has a super exciting style. It's an in-your-face, heavy Muay Thai-based style with backed by the most submission victories in UFC history. It doesn't get much more exciting and entertaining than Charles Oliveira. So this matchup against Arman, I really do believe that this is a #1 contender fight where whoever wins is most likely probably going to fight Islam Makhachev in what it looks to be June. And I really think this matchup, man, whoever wins this thing, I mean, you're going to be riding on a high wave because many people are looking at Oliveira as well. He was a bad matchup for Islam. He had to go into Islam's backyard. That's why he lost. Like, there's a number of reasons why people feel that Oliveira wasn't at his best. And then you're going up against Arman, who he really has given Islam the toughest test that we've basically seen in Islam's career. So it's like whoever wins this fight has to feel really good going into a matchup with Islam because it doesn't get any more high profile outside of a title fight for a #1 contender than Oliveira versus Arman because they both are coming off of crazy finishes over Beneil Dariush. They're both hungry for that next crack at Islam Makhachev. This is a great fight. I think that's going to be a banger. Okay, now we got Zhang Weili versus Yan Shana. And I know that this matchup took a lot of heat, but guys, outside of Alexa Grasso and Valentina Shevchenko 3, this is the best women's fight in the UFC that they could have made. I mean, this is first of all, I wish it was kind of happening in Zhang Weili's backyard and Yan Shana. And I get that whole storyline, but on UFC 300, a belt on the line where, in case you haven't noticed, in terms of women's MMA, Zhang Weili's a big name. People want to see her fight. She's physically gifted. She's very strong. She's got good striking, good takedowns. Like, she's very well-rounded. And I think that this matchup, whoever wins, is put in the spotlight. I think that this is going to be a fight where we get a finish. I think it's going to be a very back-and-forth fight because Yan Shana is very much deserving of a title shot. I think it's a banger. I think it's a great fight, and I don't know why people are crapping on. Okay, Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway for the BMF belt. Now, we have to assume that this possibly could be the co-main event, or it's very much kind of up there towards the top of the card. This is a crazy fight. This is a crazy fight, and I've been on the record saying in other videos that a lot of people are kind of not being fair with this matchup, and a lot of people are saying, RIP Max. They're just diagnosing Max with losing this matchup by brutal, battering of Justin Gaethje, and I don't see it that way because if you think that Max Holloway is going to go into this matchup and be reckless like he was, back in the day, then he doesn't really stand much of a shot with Justin Gaethje because we know what Gaethje possesses with the leg kicks, the power, the boxing combinations. We know what Gaethje's about. He's a human highlight. The guy earns a bonus every time he fights. So putting Max in that kind of danger, I don't think that's the game plan Max and his team have. And this is kind of a side quest with possibly some high stakes on it because there's the rumors and some things behind the scenes where whoever wins this matchup, why would they do this for the BMF belt when Gaethje could have possibly have had a title shot with Islam? Max could have been next in line if Ilya beats Volk. So it's why would they take this fight? One, money. Two, it's on UFC 300 and for the BMF belt. And then is it possible that the winner will fight either Michael Chandler or hopefully Conor McGregor is what they're hoping, which would be a massive payday, a massive fight. I believe that's the long game that the UFC is playing with this, and they're kind of hoping that, that Conor can get a win and it plays out that way. Maybe that's a stretch. I don't know. But overall, guys, this nonsense of UFC 300 not being good, being terrible, is just not true. Off of everything that we have of this card thus far, it's going to be a good card, and I do believe the headliner of UFC 300 will most likely be Israel Adesanya taking on Dricus du Plessis because we know about the backstory of this, right? The history, when Dricus went out there and was able to finish Robert Whittaker, no one really thought he was going to win the fight, and he goes out there, he does it, the whole antics in the cage with Izzy, and then they tried to get Dricus to turn around and fight Izzy, in September. He had some injuries. It didn't happen. And then Strickland goes in, and what are the odds? Strickland goes in there and walks through Izzy, which I don't think anyone saw that happening. I think that, the UFC gave Izzy Strickland because they're like, this is a striker. That's what Izzy does best. We think Adesanya can get this thing done. And sure enough, Strickland goes out there and does what he does and turns himself into basically a superstar now. So kind of a good thing, kind of a bad thing. But the UFC, I don't think that they're going to let that fight slip through their hands again, because there's only so much time that they're going to get to have. And I know that people would like to see this be like some sort of Africa card where it's a matchup between DDP and Adesanya. But for UFC 300, it's a big event. And what a main event for that needs is, I know that people want to see great X's and O's matchups, but what sells to the people is beef, animosity, and guys that aren't going to touch gloves at the beginning of the fight. If you want that, look no further. DDP and Izzy will deliver on that. And I think it's a great fight. I think it's a great X's and O's matchup. It's got the beef, the animosity, the history. What do you all think? Like this video. Comment your opinion below on UFC 300 this far. What you guys think of the matchups. And subscribe to the channel. Help your boy out. See you next time.